We live in a world full of noise. Everyone is speaking, posting, arguing, shouting. But with all this talking, is anyone really listening? Here's the strange truth. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. Silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. In ancient traditions, silence was seen as sacred. In Eastern philosophy, it's the space where truth lives. The Tao Te Ching says, "Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know." Think about it. What do you hear in complete silence? Your thoughts, your fears, your truth. In silence, the mask slips. The noise fades. And what's real begins to rise. We've been trained to fear silence, to fill every moment. But what if silence isn't absence? What if it's presence? What if silence is the voice of the soul? Modern life runs from silence. We scroll through endless feeds, blast music, binge shows, anything to avoid that still moment. But why? Because silence brings us face to face with what we're running from, our own thoughts, our pain, our emptiness. Silence reveals what noise tries to cover up. Psychologists say many people feel anxious in silence because it breaks their illusions. It leaves them alone with themselves. But that discomfort? That's the doorway. In the past, people went into silence on purpose. Hermits, monks, mystics. Not to escape the world, but to hear something deeper. Today, we drown it all out. We fear silence because we know it speaks the truth. Across all ages and cultures, silence has always been a teacher. Lao Tzu wrote poems that pointed beyond words. Buddha sat in silence under the Bodhi tree. Jesus often went alone into the wilderness. The Sufis danced into silence. The yogis meditated in caves for years. They weren't trying to add more knowledge. They were learning to uncover what was already there. Because deep truth can't be spoken, it can only be felt. Words are limited. Silence is infinite. There's an old saying, "Speech is silver, but silence is golden." These ancient voices all whispered the same secret. The real wisdom waits in stillness. Silence isn't just peaceful, it can also be powerful. In times of conflict, silence can protect you. In moments of pressure, it can guide you. In arguments, silence can say more than shouting ever could. Think of Martin Luther King Jr. standing in silent protest. Think of Gandhi's vow of silence, once a week. Think of how silence can disarm, unsettle, or comfort, depending on how it's used. The world teaches us to react, to talk back, to defend. But silence? Silence gives you space, strength, strategy. In the art of war, the best moves are often the quietest. Sometimes saying nothing is the most powerful thing you can do. Most people don't really listen. They wait for their turn to speak. They nod while thinking of their next response. But real listening is an act of silence, and it's rare. To truly listen, you must become quiet inside. You must put your ego aside. You must be fully present. That kind of silence can heal. It can change relationships. It can build trust. The people who've helped you the most in life, did they lecture you or did they listen? Real connection happens in silence, not speeches. To listen deeply is to love deeply. There's a kind of silence the world can't touch. It lives inside you, when the thoughts stop, when the noise fades, when you're not chasing anything. Just being. That silence is your core, your essence, your soul. The mystics called it the still point, a place beyond fear, beyond desire, a place where nothing is missing. You don't need to travel far to find it. Just close your eyes, breathe, wait. This is the silence that gives birth to creativity, intuition, and peace. In that silence, you meet the real you, not the version you show the world, but the one beneath it all. And once you find that, nothing outside can shake you. Words can lie, but silence tells the truth. Words can distract, but silence reveals. Silence is the language of the soul. It speaks without sound, it teaches without effort, it heals without touch. In a world that's always talking, The one who learns to be silent becomes powerful. This is not about being quiet out of fear. It's about choosing stillness from strength. It's about trusting the voice inside more than the noise outside. The final truth: you are not your words. You are the silence beneath them. And that silence is where your power lives. What if silence is stronger than speech? Think about it. We live in a world full of noise. Everyone's talking, posting, arguing, sharing. Silence feels awkward, like something's missing. But maybe silence isn't empty. Maybe it's full of something deeper. Have you ever felt a moment so powerful you couldn't speak? Or been around someone who said nothing, but their presence said everything? This section opens with a question that flips your understanding. It challenges what you've been taught about communication, because silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes silence means power, control, peace. We introduce the idea that silence is not the absence of sound, it's the presence of truth. And we plant a seed. What if silence is a language of its own? Long ago, people didn't fear silence, they honored it. In ancient India, silence was called mauna, a practice of deep wisdom. In Zen Buddhism, silence leads to enlightenment. Jesus went into silence before speaking his deepest truths. And in the Tao Te Ching we hear, "Those who know do not speak." Why did the greatest teachers value silence so much? Because silence clears the noise. It opens space for truth to rise. Words can lie, silence cannot. In this section, we look at what ancient wisdom teaches us about silence. These weren't passive people. They were seekers of something greater. And they knew that real understanding doesn't always come in words, but in stillness. Now let's bring it to the modern world. Science is starting to catch up with what mystics always knew. Silence changes the brain. It improves memory. It lowers stress. And it activates the part of your brain linked to deep thought and creativity. In one study, silence helped regenerate brain cells. In others, people felt calmer, clearer, more alive after even a few minutes of silence. That's no coincidence. This section bridges the mystical and the scientific. It shows that silence isn't just nice, it's necessary. It resets the mind. It heals the nervous system. It brings you back to yourself. So maybe silence isn't a luxury, it's a need. We use words every day to connect, to express, but sometimes we use them to hide. In today's world, everyone is talking. Online, in meetings, in arguments. But underneath it all, there's a fear. A fear of being quiet, of facing what's underneath the words. This section explores how words, when misused, become a shield, a way to avoid vulnerability, a way to run from truth. You'll begin to see how speaking can sometimes be just noise and silence a mirror. When you stop talking, something else starts to speak. Silence creates space, and in that space, your real self shows up. You start to feel things more deeply. You start to notice what was always there hiding under the noise. Maybe it's peace, maybe it's pain, maybe it's the truth you've been avoiding. Carl Jung called this meeting your shadow, the part of you you've pushed away. But in silence, the mask falls, and what's left is real. Here's the twist. If silence is so powerful, why do we avoid it? Because silence reveals. And the truth can be scary. We fill our lives with noise to avoid what we feel in the quiet. Music, media, conversations, constant distraction. But what are we running from? This section reveals the hidden fear underneath the noise. We're afraid to hear our own thoughts, to sit with our feelings, to be alone with ourselves. But the moment we stop running, everything starts to change. Now we return to the beginning, but with new eyes. Silence isn't the absence of meaning, it's the space that holds it all. The stillness before sound, the pause between heartbeats, the breath before creation. Everything begins in silence. Even you, this final section ties everything together. We close with a deep reminder. Silence is not empty. It's where life begins. You're invited to not just understand this, but to feel it, because the most powerful truths are never shouted. They're whispered in silence. People are drawn to those who speak less but mean more. Silence gives weight to your words. It creates mystery, depth, presence. Leaders, sages, even animals. You'll notice the most powerful ones don't say much, because they don't need to. Their silence says everything. Meditation, prayer, deep reflection, all begin in silence. Silence is not the absence of sound. It's the doorway to something greater. It's where you stop thinking and start knowing. Where the ego fades and something timeless enters. Spiritual awakening doesn't happen through lectures. It happens in the quiet moments, alone, listening, being. Most people run from silence. They fill their days, their phones, their heads, anything but sit alone, in stillness. Why? Because silence is honest. It shows you what's really there, without filters, without distractions, and that's scary. But it's also the only way through. Real growth begins where comfort ends. Silence is that edge. So now you know, silence isn't weakness. It's a forgotten power, a doorway to yourself, a space where truth lives. The world will always try to pull you back into noise, into endless talking and doing, but something in you already knows. You don't need more words. You need less of the world. And more of you. Will you dare to be still?